The United Nations Climate Change Conference, COP27, has for the past 2 weeks been deliberating on issues of concern with a breakthrough agreement to provide compensation funding for vulnerable countries hit hard by climate disasters. COP27 brought together more than 45,000 participants to share ideas, solutions, and build partnerships and coalition after weeks of intense negotiations and deliberations set against a difficult geopolitical backdrop. COP27 resulted in countries delivering a package of decisions that reaffirmed their commitment to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. The conference also strengthened action by countries to cut greenhouse gas emissions and adapt to inevitable impacts of climate change, as well as boosting the support of finance, technology, and capacity building. A launch of 25 new collaborative actions in 5 key areas: power, road transport, steel, hydrogen, and agriculture. A G7-led plan called the Global Shield Financing Facility was launched at COP27 to provide funding to countries suffering climate disasters. Important progress was made on forest protection with the launch of the Forest and Climate Leaders Partnership, which aims to unite action by governments, businesses, and community leaders to halt forest loss and land degradation by 2030. The conference has come to an end. What next for the participating countries? On the program Nigeria Today, our focus will be on the lessons drawn and the way to go. This is Nigeria Today. I am Eukaria Clinton. With me in the studio to discuss COP27 agreement is Honorable Samuel Onuibu, Chairman, Climate Parliament, Nigeria, as well as Vice President, Africa Globe. You're welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you very much. Good evening, viewers.
Honorable, you were in Egypt for the COP27. I hope you had a good time.
Yeah, it was hectic, but I'm happy that it went well.
Okay, and how was the overall experience, in Egypt?
It was a wonderful experience in that there were some achievements from the angle of being able to secure loss and damage. The first time it was put on the agenda, and affected countries were able to push it. It was not easy during the negotiations. And eventually we have it there, and the funding will be provided for that over time. And of course, the machinery for operationalizing that has already been put in place. So 2 ministers, one from the developed world, the other one from the developing world, are going to work together to ensure that the structure is properly established. So in terms of significant achievement, that's why it is referred to as a historic achievement. That loss and damage, which had been discussed in the past, but without getting this kind of weight that it got, I think it's a very positive development for the nations. And then, just like you mentioned, there were so many other agreements that were reached, and so many other commitments, from the developed countries. A country like the United States, made a commitment up to 150 million on the issues of adaptation and all that. So for us, it was a positive thing. But we must also acknowledge the fact that something like phasing out coal, fossil fuel, all those things that we're holding responsible, for causing greenhouse gas emissions, those were not given the kind of attention we thought it was going to receive this time around, probably because of the changing global, development with what is going on in Ukraine and the challenge from energy, inflation, and maybe just recovering from COVID. So those appear to be a little bit of the weakness of the overall agreement. But in all, I think everyone, particularly the countries from developing nations that are vulnerable to the devastating effects of climate change, especially when you juxtapose their contribution, which is minimal, against, what the developed nations are, emitting. But we feel the impact more than anyone else. You saw what happened in the country just not long ago, where how many states were underwater. The same thing in Pakistan, where almost 2/3 of the country was underwater. So we feel it more than the developed nations. So getting loss and damage on the table and part of the agreement and commitment, I think it's a major achievement for us.
Okay, you actually mentioned earlier the breakthrough agreement to provide loss and damage funding to vulnerable countries hit hard by the climate disaster. How will this decision impact on Africa, especially Nigeria?
Well, we are hopeful that it's going to impact positively, meaningfully, productively, on the well-being of Africans and other developing countries that are vulnerable to the effects of climate change. One thing we have to actually recognize is the fact that it wasn't there before we went to Egypt. So getting it on the table and it was a tough recall. The COP was extended by about either 2 days or so because of intense negotiation. So getting it there and setting up this structure that I just mentioned is a clear indication that we now have something where we can dip hands and have money with which to take care of those impacts all over the world. Because before now, these impacts would come and go without those causing the problem batting an eyelid. Yeah.
Okay, now, it's one thing to make a decision. Another thing is to implement it. In the past, there's been this promise to mobilize $100 billion per year by 2020. But that promise is still to be met. So how do we guarantee that this decision that has been met will be implemented?
Well, the good thing is that the world has come to the realization that climate change is an existential threat. The pretenses before about, climate change is just firing a warning shot and other, those ones have completely evaporated. We're now living with the reality. And it is because of this reality that we have seen all around the world that everyone now, well, most countries, let me not say everyone, have come forward to say, let's find a solution to this, because it's not good for any particular country. Effects of what happened in Nigeria, when almost everywhere was affected, states, nobody could move. Effects of what happened in Pakistan. I recall in 2012, when we were having major, issues to discuss in the Southeast. I was a commissioner by then. And because almost a similar thing happened, the economy was devastated. We hadn't even recovered from that before this one now happened. This one that happened, the flood, I think you have seen the extent of the damage around the country. Yes. So no one wants this to continue to happen, because as it continues to happen without any assistance, then it has the potential to disrupt everything and create more problems. Do not forget that there is some kind of interconnection between the effects of climate change and security. So it is in the interest of everyone for us to have a direction that we're working towards in solving the challenges or the problems coming out of climate change.
Okay, so let me take you a little bit back memory lane. In 2015, the president has committed Nigeria to the Paris Agreement with a pledge to conditionally reduce greenhouse gas emission by 45% by the year 2030. Although we are not up in 2030, but between 2015 and now, looking at the journey so far, would you say we've made a landmark achievement in that regard?
We have indeed, and I'll tell you something perhaps you are not aware. We did a review of the NDCs, and submitted, I think that was July last year. I think I mentioned this when I delivered a paper at the Scottish Parliament in Edinburgh. That was last year's COP, you know. We have moved from even that 45. We have now made a commitment, which is involuntary one, to 47%. So it's clear for you to say that we are making progress in that direction. The other unconditional one that we say we are going to do, that one is about 20%. So if you check how far we have gone, beginning from when Mr. President, you know, joined to pass the Paris Agreement in Paris, France, in 2015. And then you see that he has done so many other things. And perhaps, since you raised the matter, let me mention some things that you are not aware of. He did not only participate, and which is why I have always commended his effort in that Paris conference. He also came to the United Nations on September 22nd, 2016, to sign the Paris Agreement on climate change on behalf of the country. Committing is one thing, then signing is another thing.
Exactly.
It was a big event. Fortunately, I was also there. And then he came to Marrakesh, also in 2016, you know, where he further demonstrated that this nation is serious about the issues of climate change. So, having captured all this, and then with the commitment he made last year at Glasgow, I think we are moving forward. Do not forget that in between this period, since he assumed office, or since he was elected in 2015, we have shown steadily that we want to resolve the issues of climate change. Now, of course, let me take this opportunity and commend him again for being the one that broke the jinx in ensuring that we have a Climate Change Act. Because we started that in the 6th Assembly, in the 7th Assembly, in the 8th Assembly, I sponsored the bill. The president declined our assent. But when, unfortunately, I was re-elected in the 9th Assembly, I re-sponsored the bill. And it is to his credit that he's the person that has signed that. And during this last COP that just ended, I had opportunity to make a lot of presentations on the nature of the Climate Change Act Nigeria. And if we didn't have that in place, we would not have had a number of people from different jurisdictions or different parliaments, you know, talking about. So Mr. President has done, and we are working to match his lofty declarations with very viable action.
What are some of the issues that you present? You know, you mentioned earlier that you chaired you chaired one of the session.
A number of sessions.
The COP, this just concluded COP. So what are the issues that was brought to the fore as it concerns Nigeria? Okay,
thank you. First, we have made the presentation about the Climate Change Act. I did that in Luxor, Egypt, where parliamentarians met. And that was under the Climate Parliament, where parliamentarians around the world come together to discuss issues of climate change and then take ideas and profile, you know, solutions as they know. And of course, you know, their business is to legislate and to ensure that if you have a global agreement, that it is domesticated within their country. So parliamentarians have critical role to play in this kind of exercise. So at Luxor, I was able to break down some of the critical provisions of the Climate Change Act, because a number of countries are also trying. As a matter of fact, Nigeria is up there as far as this is concerned. You know, ahead of, thank you very much, and then thank the nation and thank Mr. President, ahead of so many other, you know, countries. So having spoken to a lot of countries on Zoom, visual, so it was another opportunity for me to be able to do presentations, to guide them on the little pitfalls and the challenges that are likely to arise, because there must have been reasons why we tried in the 6th Assembly, 7th Assembly, 8th Assembly, until we got it in the 9th Assembly. So I made a presentation on that. Then, on the issue of chairing, I chaired a session on, you know, the issues of biodiversity, desertification, and climate change itself, because these are products of Rio Convention. So there is interconnectedness between these. Because when you are talking about land degradation, as you mentioned in your listen, you discover that even here already we know that. And that is why even in the Climate Change Act, we made a provision, you know, from sections 27, 28, and 29, that there should be something about nature-based solutions. And this way, you are talking about deforestation, and you are talking about the issues of reducing emissions through, you know, deforestation,
Okay.
so that you do not degrade the land. Because when you degrade the land, you create an open space that becomes ungovernable and that is now seized upon by non-actors who like to use that to practice some other things that are not healthy for the nation. So that's one. Then you talk about biodiversity. But however, it is climate change that rings so much bell. But these three were, products of Rio Convention, and there's interconnectedness.
All right. We'll now take a break from the discussion and be back in a moment. Don't go away.
This is NTA News 24 broadcasting from Abuja. You can watch us anywhere, anytime on the following platforms.
Start Times Channel 101, Brick TV Channel 703, GSTV Channel 419, and Go TV Channel 46.
For more information, log on to our website www.nta.ng or join us on our social media handles, Facebook at NTA News 24.
For comments, suggestions and inquiries, send an email to news24@nta.gov.ng or call us on the following numbers.
NTA News 24,
news and more news.
Welcome back to the program. The program is still Nigeria Today, and we are discussing COP27 agreement with Honorable Samuel Onigbo, Chairman, Climate Parliament Nigeria, as well as Vice President, Africa Globe. Honorable, as we were talking earlier, what are some of the lessons Nigerians must draw from the conference, and do you think we need more legislation to achieve more in the area of climate change?
Yeah, thank you very much. We need more legislations, but again, it's not just legislation only that you need, but truly we need more legislation, and we're working on a number of them, to really break it down. Because the Climate Change Act Nigeria is almost all embracing, it's significant, it's holistic. It has, it has almost an umbrella power, because Mr. President chairs the Climate Change, National Council on Climate Change, according to the Act, and his absence, the Vice President. And the reason why we did that is to ensure that all hands are on deck, and that there's no one that comes around. That's a coin that I came up with, because I benefited from my experience when I was commissioner, where peers, you will call a meeting, they will want to undermine the meeting even when they are pretending that they are working along with you. So for that reason, I came up with a coinage that I refer to as peer jealousy. So the presence of Mr. President eliminates that, because once he calls a meeting, he is the appointer of all these people occupying positions. If he calls a meeting of the members of the council, surely they must come. So we need the laws. This one will guide for us to break down a few other ones, for addressing specific issues. But in terms of a global, coverage, the Climate Change Act is there. However, when we get these laws, break them down, I do not think that we're again going to work towards creating maybe some agencies that are not, so productive. You can remember the oral report. We're trying to harmonize and then maybe merge a number of agencies without unnecessary duplication. However, where it is absolutely necessary, such laws will be either enacted or passed.
Okay, you just talked about all hands being on deck on this. There should be a collaborative effort.
Absolutely.
Now, what is the role of the private sector in trying to mitigate the effects of the climate change generally? How far will we say the sector have tried in that area?
Okay, that's a good question. I think your questions are eliciting even answers I didn't want to give. Now, if you take time and study the Climate Change Act Nigeria, we make provisions even for the private sector, for them to sit on that council.
Okay.
They are members of the National Council on Climate Change. Reason is that we do not want this to be restricted just to government agencies alone. Because the man who is manufacturing cement is creating some pollution. The guy who is running a factory and, you know, allowing a lot of things go into the water system is contributing. The man who is in the business of, you know, refining fuel and all that, these are organizations usually owned by private sector. So they have a seat on that. So that just like we have a seat for the subnationals, you know, with the Governors Forum chairman is also a member of the National Council on Climate Change. The president of Association of Local Government Councils in Nigeria will also sit there. Reason being that, yes, the federal government is not supposed to legislate for them. But you know, pollution has no borders. So any problem you cause in your local government has the potential to affect even those who are here in Abuja and people outside of Nigeria. So this way, we have the private sector, the subnationals like Governors Forum, their chairman, and the president of Association of Local Government. And then we have the youths, women, and people with disability also on that council. Then before you start talking about the National Security Advisor, you know, the central bank governor, and all that. Because, you know, when we are, structuring this bill, and some of us said, we need the central bank governor there. That was a while now. But some people resisted it. But you can see how things are turning. That we were even very well foresighted in doing all this. So the private sector is involved. And the essence of having their member on the council is that if there are resolutions or policy direction, he has a duty to report, because they too have their own group, you know. So the private sector is, and we also made a provision for fine for individuals who fail to comply. I think we said if you are employing somebody maybe up to 50, then you have a duty to report. And when you provide this report is channeled to the council. So it's quite, you know, all embracing.
What is your advice to stakeholders on what must be done in the long and the short run, you know, to long run fight, you know, in the looking at the conference and the decisions made, and you were there as a participant, what advice would you give to stakeholders, you know, in order to put their efforts together as a nation, you know, as a people, to achieve these set goals, you know, before us? Because at the end of the day, like you said earlier, all hands must be on deck.
Absolutely.
Everybody is involved. The citizens are involved.
Exactly.
Private sector, the public, because not just the matter of, oh, the government will do everything. Everybody. So what's your advice?
Well, my advice is simple. I've mentioned it here, that the issues of pollution and all that, and the problems that it brings, it's not restricted to, you know, one local government, one state, one country. It is borderless. Of course, I don't need to explain again. It is emissions caused by developed nations that are creating some of the problems for even those who are contributing, at least here in Africa, we're contributing less than 5% of global emissions. But look at the impact, the desertification, the rate at which it's racing down, the disruption we have had, problems that we have with the Sahel, what we call the Sahel challenge, you know, and all that. So everyone has to play their role, whether you are an individual. Of course, you must notice that even in some states are beginning to create, you know, Ministry of Climate Change. At least I think we have that in Cross River and maybe one or two other states. So we all have to come forward, even as individuals. Things you shouldn't do, areas you should not burn and, you know, and pollute. The trees you should not fell. If you need to cut down trees, replant, because we need to really, really, really preserve the environment, not just for ourselves, but even for generations unborn.
Thank you very much. And that's it today on Nigeria Today. And a special thanks to our guest, Honorable Samuel Onigo, Chairman, Parliament, Nigeria, as well as Vice President, Africa Globe. Thank you for the insightful contributions and your time you gave us. Thank you for coming when we called you.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. And we thank you, our viewer, immensely for being a part of the program today. The program airs weekdays at 7:30 in the evening on NTA News 24. And you can watch this episode and other episodes on www.youtube.com/NTA News 24 Hub. I am Eukaria Clinton. Bye for now.
different fridge in their bedroom and everything. In Ajegun, they have only one fridge in one. So I've subsidized their own, charge the people in Ikoyi appropriately. It's simple, because they can afford to pay. Is that what we are talking about, fuel subsidy?